That look. It was that look that sealed it for me. You know, that dismissive gaze? The one that sizes you up like an antique armchair, long past its prime, yet too much of a hassle to discard. My own grandson, Ethan, fixed me with that look, then turned to the others and casually announced how this old lady barely knew her way around a cell phone. That Thursday night, I drove my 2015 Honda Civic, kept pristine, thank you very much, home, my hands clamped white-knuckled on the wheel. Not from fear, not from sorrow, from a quiet, simmering rage. The kind that doesn't explode into a scene, but crystallizes into something hard and sharp. The very rage women of my generation learned to turn into plans. Have you ever wondered what happens when a 66-year-old woman is underestimated? When her quiet demeanor is mistaken for weakness? When a few wrinkles are presumed to mean uselessness? Well, I'm about to tell you. My name is Susan Miller. I was born in a small town in upstate New York, where the scent of freshly brewed coffee fills the mornings, and where the most important words are often spoken in a whisper. For 40 years I was the clerk at the county records office. I know every deed, every will, every contract that ever passed through those old wooden drawers. I know the documented secrets of all the important families, and a good many of the undocumented ones, too. A widow for 12 years, I live alone in a simple house with a porch where I grow basil, rosemary, and a blueberry bush that gives fruit twice a year. From my kitchen come the best preserves in the county, the very ones my daughter-in-law Jen fakes praise for, before burying them deep in the back of her refrigerator. You really should move closer to us, Susan, she always coos, her voice dripping with feigned concern. What she really means is, sell this house and give us the money. I've never been one for confrontation. Arthur, my husband, used to say I had still waters where others had raging currents. Perhaps that's why no one expected me to react. Perhaps that's why what happened next caught everyone completely by surprise, including me. It was January 2022 when everything began to shift. The rich aroma of my braised chicken with okra, my grandmother's cherished recipe, still hung in the air of the dining room at my son Mike's house. The mahogany table I'd given them as a wedding gift was meticulously set with the fine china. The set that saw daylight only when I was visiting. Open windows invited the chirping of cicadas and the warm, lazy breeze of that late summer afternoon. Ethan, my 18-year-old grandson, was holding forth, waving his high school diploma, bubbling with plans for the University of Virginia. The boy has his grandfather's smile, but undeniably his father's temperament. A cocktail of arrogance and insecurity, thinly veiled by an assumed confidence. Agricultural engineering is the future, Dad. With Grandma's land, we could even start a business after I graduate, he declared, as Jen scooped another heap of my savory cornbread dressing onto her plate. Mike offered a tight smile, his gaze skating past mine. I feigned absorption in my blueberry preserves, spreading them on a biscuit, all the while noting how no one else touched the homemade jar, preferring the supermarket jelly Jen kept on the table. Grandma, don't you think I should try law? It has more prestige, asked my 17-year-old granddaughter, Charlotte, the only one who still offered me a sliver of genuine deference. Before I could answer, Ethan let out a brittle laugh. Oh, come on, Lottie. She doesn't understand anything about our world. What could she possibly know about today's job market? She can barely use WhatsApp. The clinking of silverware suddenly sounded like a gong in the awkward silence that followed. Mike swallowed hard, feigning deafness, while Jen managed a faint, almost swallowed, "Ethan, respect." Charlotte's face, a beacon of scarlet, screamed her discomfort. Not a single soul at that table offered a sincere defense. I merely smiled serenely, though something brittle inside me cracked, like fine porcelain under pressure. It wasn't the first time Ethan had treated me like a useless relic, but it was the first time I fully grasped that no one at that table truly disagreed with him. "Everyone finds their own path, my dear," I replied, my voice calm, almost detached. "But Charlotte, to your question, law is a noble profession, provided you use that knowledge for good." The wall clock, the one I gave Mike when he married, chimed 8. The same clock he'd once wanted to banish from the living room because it clashed with the decor. But Jen had insisted on keeping it because Mike's mom would be upset. As if I wasn't right there in the room when they'd had that very conversation. The ceiling fan spun a lazy orbit, circulating the sweet scent of the creamy caramel flan I'd brought in an old aluminum pan. Outside, the day's hot asphalt began to cool, and the distant snarl of a speeding motorcycle sliced through the neighborhood's quiet murmurs. "Let's go to the living room. It's cooler there," Mike suggested, rising from the table without once meeting my eye. Everyone rose, but I lingered, automatically gathering a few plates. A lifelong habit, I suppose, of someone who had always served. "Leave it, Mom. Rosie will clean up tomorrow," Mike said, referring to their housekeeper. "It's no bother, son." I stood, plates in hand. My joints ached a little. Early arthritis, I suppose, but I never let anyone see it. Weakness, in this family, is an open invitation to be cast aside. In the kitchen, as I organized the dishes, I spotted Ethan's cell phone on the granite counter. Unlocked. The screen still lit, displaying a WhatsApp conversation. Without a second thought, I slid my finger across the screen. The very one he claimed I barely knew how to use. The chat was with a contact saved simply as Dad. My heart squeezed tight as I read. "Hey, Dad. How's Grandma doing? Did she bring it up?" "No, not yet. Still acting oblivious." "Good. Just make sure she doesn't find out before the semester starts. My friends are already counting on that new car, and the tuition is insane." "Don't worry. She's old school. She'll come around." I swallowed hard. The house, usually so lively, seemed to hold its breath, only the refrigerator's low hum filling the sudden void. My fingers, which for decades had organized county records documents with surgical precision, now moved with the same efficient purpose through my grandson's phone. I navigated to the email app, found the college application confirmation, and committed the number to memory. I never needed to write anything down. My memory had always been my pride, and my secret weapon. I returned the phone to its exact previous position and resumed tidying the kitchen as if nothing had transpired. The sharp scent of lemon dish soap mingled with the lingering dinner aromas, creating that singular, comforting fragrance of a family meal drawing to a close. When I re-entered the living room, Ethan and Mike were deep in a discussion about cars, while Charlotte showed something on her phone to Jen. No one registered my presence. I had become, as so often happens to women my age, invisible. "Do you need a ride home, Susan?" Jen asked when she finally noticed me, her voice coated in that cloying, false solicitousness that always set my teeth on edge. "No need, dear. I'm driving myself. Still have a few things to take care of." "At this hour, Mom? What commitments?" Mike questioned, finally, his gaze locking onto mine. "Life doesn't stop at 60, my son," I replied with a faint smile, as I picked up my well-worn brown leather purse, the same one I'd carried for 15 years, which Jen had once suggested I update. I kissed everyone goodbye and slipped out, the delicate scent of my classic floral perfume lingering behind me like a ghost. As I exited, I heard Ethan remark, "Grandma and her mysteries." It wasn't a mystery. It was merely the opening move of a plan. What Mike and his family didn't know, or willfully ignored, was that 3 months prior, while I was at Thursday evening Bible study, my son had paid my house a visit. Using the key he'd kept since childhood, a key I'd deliberately never asked for back, he'd rummaged through my personal documents. He'd found out about the inheritance I'd received from my brother, Carl. 144 acres of land on the outskirts of town that had soared in value with the burgeoning agricultural industry in the region. I found the cabinet ever so subtly disarranged and faint fingerprints on the papers. Mike had always been careless, even as a boy. He'd even forgotten to wipe the mud from his shoes off the welcome mat. The only person privy to my discovery was Millie, my neighbor of 30 years, who'd seen Mike leaving my house that day. We were sitting on my porch, the wicker chairs groaning softly under our weight, porcelain teacups of fresh coffee steaming before us. The church bell in the distance chimed 3 o'clock. "Susan, be careful with that boy. Adult children mean double the trouble," she said, adjusting her gold-rimmed glasses. "Mikey's always been a curious one," I'd replied, feigning nonchalance. "Not curious, Susan. Calculating. I saw the way he rushed out of here. I know that look. It's the same one my brother-in-law had when he found out my sister was ill." A gentle breeze rustled the blueberry bush leaves, casting dancing shadows across the concrete porch floor. A beetle buzzed lazily around the fern pot. Millie was right, as always. The week after the cabinet incident, as I'd begun to call it mentally, Mike started calling daily. Suddenly my son, who barely remembered my birthday, was gravely concerned about my blood pressure, my aching back, the security of my isolated house. "Mom, have you ever considered selling that land Uncle Carl left you? It's a lot of work to manage at your age." "It's no work at all, son. It's been leased to the Millers for years." "But what about taxes? The endless paperwork? You don't need to bother with any of that. I can take care of everything. Just sign over a power of attorney." The sound of his voice on the phone, that falsely concerned, honeyed tone, echoed teenage Mike, the one who always wanted money for a night out with friends. The same intonation, 40 years later. "The money could really help Ethan with college," he'd persisted. "That land must be worth an absolute fortune now." That's when it hit me. They already had blueprints for my money. Blueprints that conveniently omitted me. That Thursday dinner merely served as stark confirmation of my suspicions. The proprietary way they spoke of the land, as if it were already theirs. The thinly veiled disrespect. The utter certainty that I was simply a temporary hurdle between them and what they considered rightfully theirs. But they overlooked one fundamental truth. I may be old, but I am certainly not foolish. The morning after dinner, I awoke to the cheerful chorus of birds nesting in the backyard avocado tree. The soft, golden light of the rising sun filtered through the lace curtains I'd crocheted when I retired from the county records office, one of many hobbies my family dismissed as old lady stuff. While dew still beaded on my small herb garden, I brewed a strong pot of coffee on the stove. The familiar aroma filled the kitchen, with its yellowed tiles, pulling forth memories of countless similar mornings. I sat at the table, my cell phone before me. That very cell phone Ethan believed I barely knew how to use, held contacts he couldn't have even imagined. I scrolled through my address book until I found the name. Eleanor. Eleanor Campbell, current director of the University of Virginia. My roommate at St. Augustine Academy in upstate New York for 7 years. The same woman who held my hand at Arthur's funeral. The same one who called me, sobbing, when her husband passed 2 years ago. I took a deep breath and dialed. 3 rings later, her familiar voice answered. "Susan, what a pleasant surprise. I was just thinking about you." We exchanged pleasantries. I asked after her children, commented on the new bakery in town. My coffee cooled, forgotten, in its cup as we spoke. Outside, the brief roar of a passing motorcycle momentarily punctured the morning's peace. My heart beat a little faster than usual. "Eleanor," I began, "do you remember that promise we made in high school? To always look out for each other?" "Of course I remember. Why? Did something happen?" "Well then, I need to tell you something about my grandson." I didn't ask for anything directly. I simply recounted the dinner incident, Mike's brazen attempt to claim my land, how Ethan treated me as if I were utterly useless. As I spoke, I idly stroked the embroidered tablecloth, an heirloom from my mother, feeling each delicate stitch beneath my wrinkled fingers. Eleanor listened in silence. I could hear her steady breathing on the other end of the line, the faint rustle of papers. She was always so organized, always taking notes as she talked. "Send me his application number," she finally said. "I'll personally review his process." After hanging up, I sat for a long time, watching the hummingbird that visited my hibiscus flowers daily. So small, so fragile in appearance, yet capable of flying hundreds of miles and even flying backward, a feat no other bird can manage. Like me, a quiet corner of my mind mused. Seemingly fragile, but with resources no one suspects. That afternoon, as I watered my plants, the phone rang. It was Mike. "Mom, I've been thinking. Why don't you come spend a few days here at the house? Jen and the kids really miss you." The same cloying voice, the same transparent intentions. "How kind, son. But I'm quite busy this week. I'm heading to the county records office to take care of some things." "County records office? What things, Mom?" The faint flicker of panic in his voice was almost imperceptible. Almost. "My business, Mike. We'll talk later." Over the following weeks, I maintained my normal routine. Church on Sundays, shopping at Mr. Peterson's grocery, afternoon coffee with Millie. But internally, something profound had shifted. The invisibility that had once bothered me was now my closest ally. Meanwhile, Ethan continued preparing for college, no doubt counting on the money from the sale of my land for his grand future plans. Mike's calls grew more frequent, his thinly disguised anxiety escalating with each passing day. "Mom, I really think you should consult an attorney about that land. A lot of people are eyeing those properties, you know." "Thank you for your concern, son. I'm already taking care of it." He didn't need to know that taking care of it meant something entirely different from anything he could possibly imagine. 3 months flowed by like water in a silent, relentless stream. The college results were finally posted. Ethan was listed first on the waiting list, a position that all but guaranteed admission, though not immediately. Mike called, his voice raw with a volatile mix of anger and despair. "Mom, Ethan didn't get in directly. We'll have to wait for the second call, maybe even the third. If it doesn't work out, I'll have to sell something to pay for a private college for him." What he really meant was, Sell that land, and sell it now, so we can pay for my son's college. Son, let me see what I can do, I replied, my voice as sweet as freshly churned butter. That same afternoon, I called the county records office where I'd worked for decades. Tony, the head clerk who had started as my intern, answered on the first ring. Susan, what a pleasure to hear from you. How can I help? I need to make a property transfer, Tony, with urgency and discretion. You know you can count on me, Susan. 3 days later, the 144 acres of land, the object of so much simmering greed, was no longer in my name. It had been transferred to the Wilderness Conservancy, an environmental preservation organization. With an irrevocable clause, the land could never be sold or have its native vegetation disturbed. Then I called Eleanor. Remember my grandson? I think he's matured. Perhaps he deserves a second chance. Are you sure, Susan? After what you told me? I am. The lesson has been taught. Now it's time for mercy. A week later, a spot opened up for Ethan. No one understood how. Coincidence, some whispered. Fate, others mused. I knew the truth, but I kept it to myself, just as I'd kept countless other secrets over the years. The next family dinner took place on a Sunday in April. The rich aroma of roasted meat filled Mike's house, blending with the clean scent of rain falling outside. Drops drummed a steady rhythm on the roof, a soft music accompanying the meal. Ethan was different, quieter, more observant. I noticed him watching me from the corner of his eye, a new intrigue in his gaze. Mike, too, seemed uncomfortable, avoiding my direct glance whenever possible. Only Jen and Charlotte acted normally, or as normally as one can act in a family brimming with unspoken secrets. Grandma, do you believe in fate? Ethan asked suddenly as he poured me water, a gesture he had never offered before. I believe in karma, my dear, I replied, a serene smile touching my lips as I spread butter on a homemade roll. The world has a very particular way of teaching its lessons, some louder than others. Mike stared at me, a glimmer of suspicion dawning in his eyes. His fork paused mid-air, a roasted potato impaled, as he wrestled with the true meaning of my words. I got a spot at the State University, Grandma, last minute. No one understands how. What a blessing, my dear, I replied calmly, my voice betraying nothing. Sometimes doors open for those who least expect them. The rain intensified outside, the sound of water gushing in the gutters rising like the discomfort at the table. I took a slow sip of the wine Mike had served, a dry red he likely considered far too sophisticated for my simple palate. Mom, Mike finally spoke, his voice tense, an edge of desperation creeping in. I went to the county records office last week. I wanted to see that documentation for Uncle Carl's land. To help you. I smiled, placing my wineglass delicately on the embroidered tablecloth, aligning it just so. You don't need to worry about that anymore, son. I've already taken care of everything. What do you mean? Taken care of? I donated the land to the Wilderness Conservancy. They're going to preserve the native forest and the springs. Your Uncle Carl would have approved. The silence that followed was as profound as a bottomless well. Mike's face drained of color. Jen's fork clattered loudly against her porcelain plate. Ethan's gaze darted from me to his father, utterly bewildered. You donated it. But why? Mike stammered. Because it was the right thing to do, Mike. That land holds stories you don't know. Springs that feed families downstream. Centuries-old trees where your grandfather used to rest and dream. I didn't mention it was also the right thing to do because I had uncovered their schemes. I didn't mention I knew about the conversations, the intentions, the raw disrespect. Some truths are far more potent when left unsaid. But what about Ethan? His college? Jen finally managed, her voice a reedy whisper. He already has a spot at the Stout University, doesn't he? Divine Providence, as my mother always said. My gaze held Ethan's, a knowing glint in my eye. Ethan now looked at me with something new in his gaze. It was no longer the casual disdain of someone who saw only a useless old woman. It was the dawning realization that there were far more layers to me than met the eye. "Grandma," he said softly, almost reverently, Do you know anyone at the university?" I smiled, spreading blueberry preserves on another roll. The same preserves no one but me ate, but which I continued to bring, dinner after dinner. "I know a great many people, my dear. I've lived a very long time in this world." Mike stared at me, comprehension slowly forming on his pale face. It was the same look he'd had as a child, caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Now," I said, a slight shift in my tone, "who wants some more chicken and rice casserole? I made it with that special seasoning your grandmother taught me, Mike. Remember how much you used to like it?" But what happened next completely changed the course of our family lives. The sound of the rain intensified, creating a curtain of water that isolated the house from the rest of the world. No one answered my offer of more chicken and rice casserole. Mike's face had acquired a pallor that reminded me of when he'd had a high fever at 7 years old. His eyes, however, were no longer those of a child. They were those of a man who was beginning to understand he had gravely underestimated his own mother. "This story doesn't make any sense," he finally managed, slamming his napkin onto the table with unnecessary force. "Why would you do that? That land was your future, your security." I took another slow sip of wine, letting the complex woody taste linger on my tongue before answering. The silence at the table was so thick, I could hear the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock, the very one Mike had once wanted to remove. "My future? My security?" I repeated softly, my voice laced with quiet amusement. "Mike, I'm 66, not 96. I still work 3 mornings a week as a consultant at the county records office. I have my retirement, my own home, and thank God my health." Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. There was something different in his gaze now, a mixture of confusion and... could it be nascent respect? "But Grandma, that land was worth a fortune," he interjected, his voice still tinged with disbelief. "You could have sold it, enjoyed the money." "For what, Ethan? To buy you a new car?" My voice remained sweet, but beneath it, a razor-sharp thread of steel. "Or perhaps to finance your studies, as your father suggested so many times on the phone?" Mike choked on his wine. Jen looked at her husband, a startled expression on her face. "What are you talking about, Mike? You were pressuring your mother to sell the land?" "It wasn't pressure, Jen." He quickly defended himself, though his voice lacked conviction. "I was merely suggesting. It's too much land for her to manage alone." "Curious," I commented, serving myself more mashed potatoes. "You never seemed concerned about my administrative capacity in the 40 years I worked at the county records office." Charlotte, who had remained silent, her attentive eyes observing every shift in expression, suppressed a small, knowing smile. I had always suspected my granddaughter understood more than she let on. Grandma, she said, her voice clear, I think it's amazing that you donated the land for preservation. It's really important to protect the environment. Thank you, dear. I smiled at her, a genuine warmth spreading through me. Some things are more valuable than money, like respect and consideration, for example. The deep blush that crept up Mike's neck to his ears told me he had caught the unspoken message. The rain continued its steady fall outside, a perfect natural soundtrack to the drama unfolding at our table. Mom. Mike tried again, his voice wavering between frustration and guilt. You know, I only want what's best for you. What's best for me. I placed my fork meticulously beside my plate, aligning it perfectly parallel to the knife. Like coming to my house when I'm at Bible study and rummaging through my documents? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the rain seemed to pause for a beat. Jen looked at Mike with wide, horrified eyes. Ethan froze, his glass halfway to his lips. What are you talking about? Mike stammered, his voice failing at the end. Son, you forget that Millie lives across the street. That Mr. Peterson at the bakery saw you parking there. That you left wet shoe prints on my rug. That the papers weren't in the exact same order I'd left them. I spoke calmly, as if discussing the weather. After 40 years organizing documents at the county records office, do you truly believe I wouldn't notice? Mike lowered his head, defeated. For a moment I saw in him the 10-year-old boy who had broken my favorite vase and tried to hide the shards under the rug. It wasn't. I just wanted to check the value of the land. I completed for him, my voice unwavering. To plan what to do with the money before even consulting me? Mike! Jen exclaimed, genuinely horrified. You actually did that? It wasn't like that, Jen, he mumbled, trying to defend himself, but his voice lacked any shred of conviction. Ethan looked from his father to me, then back again, like a spectator at a tennis match. His expression shifted with each revelation, from initial disbelief to discomfort, and then to something close to profound shame. And you, Ethan? I turned my gaze to my grandson, my voice still gentle but firm. Do you really think I barely know how to use WhatsApp? That I'm just this old lady who doesn't understand the modern world? His eyes widened in sudden realization. Grandma, The day of the dinner, your phone sat on the kitchen counter, unlocked. I watched the recognition dawn in his eyes, followed by a flush of panic. The conversations with your father about the land, about the new car you wanted to buy with the money, about how, at my age, I wouldn't need so much money. The fiery flush on Ethan's face now was not from anger, but from deep, burning shame. Beside me, Charlotte looked at her brother with a mixture of surprise and profound disappointment. Do you really think, I continued, my voice finally betraying a whisper of the hurt I had kept so carefully hidden, that I reached 66 years old being naive? That I don't notice when I'm being manipulated? Mom, it's not what it seems. Mike tried one last time. It's exactly what it seems, Mike. I folded my napkin carefully and placed it beside my plate, a small, decisive gesture. You see me as an obstacle, as someone who needs to be managed. As if my resources were naturally yours by right. The silence that followed was broken only by the softer drumming of the rain. A different clarity began to fill the room. Not merely the yellowish glow from the chandeliers, but the sharp, piercing clarity of truth, finally laid bare. But do you know what saddens me most? I continued, looking each of them directly in the eye. It's not the greed, It's the disrespect. It's thinking that just because I have wrinkles, because sometimes it takes me a while to understand a new technology, I don't deserve consideration. As if getting old somehow makes me less human. Jen had tears in her eyes now. I'd never seen her so openly affected. Mike looked as if he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "Grandma," Ethan finally spoke, his voice choked with emotion. I didn't know you had seen those messages. Evidently. I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry. He seemed genuinely remorseful. I don't know why I said those things. Why I even thought those things. I know, Ethan. My voice softened a fraction. It's what society teaches. That old people are useless. That we are burdens, not people with experience and value. That's not true, Charlotte interrupted, reaching out to place her hand gently over mine. You've always been my inspiration, Grandma. Strong, independent, intelligent. I smiled at her, squeezing her hand in return. Thank you, dear. Mike finally lifted his gaze, his eyes red-rimmed. Mom, I don't know what to say. I was an idiot, a terrible son. No, Mike, you were human, fallible, like all of us. I sighed, feeling a profound weight lift from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying. But now we need to decide what kind of family we want to be from now on. You'll never truly forgive me, will you? He asked, his voice cracking. I already have, son. Forgiving is easy when you love. But trusting again, that takes time. He nodded slowly, understanding the distinction. So, Ethan interrupted, still processing the earthquake that had just shaken our world. You really know someone at the university? Is that why I got the spot? I smiled, reaching for my purse beside my chair. From inside, I pulled out a time-yellowed photograph. 2 teenage girls in old-fashioned school uniforms, arms linked, beaming at the camera in front of a stately red brick building. This is me, I pointed, and this is Eleanor Campbell, current director of the University of Virginia. Ethan's eyes widened to saucers. The director? You know the director. We shared a room at boarding school for 7 years. I was her maid of honor at her wedding. She was your father's godmother. I slid the photo back into my purse. We still talk monthly. I know her 3 children. I was at her husband's funeral 2 years ago. So she was the one who... Ethan began, a new awe in his voice. Who ensured your application was properly reviewed? Yes. I took another sip of wine, savoring it. After I discovered your plans for my land, I told her how you were treating me, how your father was trying to appropriate what was mine. She was. Indignant, let's say. That's why I was on the waiting list, Ethan concluded, understanding finally flooding his face. Exactly. A small lesson in consequences. I smiled serenely. But after I donated the land, I asked her to reconsider, because I believe in second chances. Mike looked at me now as if he were truly seeing me for the very first time. You planned all this? Planned is a strong word. Let's say. I merely chose not to be a victim of circumstances. A different kind of silence settled over the table. It was no longer the heavy silence of guilt or anger, but a contemplative quiet. A moment of re-evaluation. So you manipulated us, Mike concluded, a slight ironic smile playing on his lips. Manipulated? No, son. I picked up my fork again, a subtle shift in my posture. I merely used the resources at my disposal, just as you attempted to do with me. I gestured towards the platter. Now, can we finally eat this dessert? I made creamy caramel flan. In the weeks that followed that revelatory dinner, something shifted irrevocably in our family dynamic. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic transformation like in the movies. It was gradual, sometimes uncomfortable, but persistent. Mike started visiting me alone, stripped of the transparent agenda of wanting something. We'd sit on the porch, sipping coffee, and slowly, tentatively, he began to confide in me about his problems at work, his genuine concerns, just like we used to, back when Arthur was alive. During one of these visits, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and rose, he finally mustered the courage to ask, "Mom, why didn't you report me? For breaking into your house? Going through your documents?" I continued rocking slowly in my rocking chair, watching the hummingbird flit among my garden flowers. What good would that do, Mike? To see my only son arrested or publicly humiliated? I sighed, the sound barely audible. I preferred to teach a lesson that could transform, not destroy. Were you always like this? South? Strategic? I chuckled softly. Your father used to say I played chess while others played checkers. But the truth is, when you're a woman, and then an older woman, you learn to use the weapons you have. He nodded thoughtful. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I know, son. Ethan, too, underwent a noticeable change. At first, his discomfort during visits was palpable. Compelled by Mike, I suspected. But over time, his visits became more natural, more frequent. He started asking me questions about the county records office, about the old documents I'd organized, about the untold stories he knew I held from so many families in the area. One day, as I showed him how to make blueberry preserves, he'd actually asked to learn. Ethan paused, stirring the pot, and looked directly at me. Grandma, how did you do it? Working for decades in that office, raising Dad alone after Grandpa died, and still staying. So strong? I continued stirring the preserves, the sweet scent filling the kitchen. A light sheen of sweat beaded on my forehead from the stove's heat. I didn't have a choice, Ethan. When your grandfather died, your father was only 15. No one was going to take care of us if I crumbled. But now, you could just relax. Let us take care of you. I smiled, picking up a saucer to test the preserve's consistency. And who said I need you to take care of me? I placed a drop of the preserves on the saucer, watching it firm without running. It's ready. Let's take it off the heat. He helped me transfer the heavy pot to the sink stand. The sweet, tart aroma of blueberries now permeated the entire kitchen. You know, Ethan, there's a difference between receiving help and being treated as incapable. I began filling the sterilized jars with the still warm preserves. I accept help when I need it, but I don't accept that others decide for me what I can or cannot do, what I should or should not know. He nodded, pensive, as he sealed the jars I filled. You're amazing, Grandma. I was a complete idiot. You were, I agreed, smiling. But you're improving. Even Jen altered her attitude. Before, she treated me with that superficial solicitousness, that exaggerated care that barely masked her underlying contempt. Now there was a genuine respect in her words, in her gestures. One Sunday afternoon, as we washed dishes after lunch, something she had never invited me to do before, Jen finally broached the subject that had hung unspoken between us for so long. Susan, I wanted to apologize for the way I treated you all these years. I dried a plate with deliberate care before responding. How did you treat me, Jen? Like you were just Mike's mother. Not like a person with your own desires and thoughts. She kept her eyes fixed on the soapy water. I guess I never made an effort to really get to know you. And why has that changed now? She stopped washing, finally meeting my gaze. Her eyes were moist. Because you taught us a lesson. All of us. You showed us that you're not just an old lady we can manipulate or ignore. You're strong. Stronger than any of us. I smiled, continuing to dry the dishes. It's not about strength, Jen. It's about dignity. We all deserve to be treated with dignity, no matter our age. She nodded, returning to washing the glasses. I'd like to start over, if you'll let me. There's always time to start over, my dear. 6 months after that revealing dinner, we were all gathered again to celebrate my birthday. 67 years old. The table was set in my backyard. It had been Ethan's idea to have the party here. Millie was present, along with other friends of mine whom my family had barely known before. Eleanor also came, much to everyone's surprise. She and Mike had a long private conversation in a corner of the garden. I don't know what was said, but my son returned with red-rimmed eyes and a distinct lightness to his shoulders. Ethan had brought some college friends. He was excelling in his courses, truly dedicating himself. He was no longer the arrogant boy who saw his grandmother as a nuisance. Charlotte helped serve the guests, always attentive, always helpful, but now with a genuine consideration, not out of obligation. Jen had prepared several dishes for the party, even attempting to make braised chicken with okra using my recipe. It wasn't quite like mine, of course, but the effort meant the world. As the sun began its descent, Mike asked for everyone's attention, raising his glass. I want to toast my mother, he began, his voice thick with emotion. Not just for her birthday, but for who she is, for everything she's taught us, especially in recent months. I looked around, taking in the smiling faces, the garden I'd cultivated for decades, the blueberry bush laden with fruit, the comforting scent of fresh coffee mingled with the delicate aroma of the roses Charlotte had brought. The sky gradually transformed into a vast, starry blanket above our heads. Mom, Mike continued, his gaze steady on mine, you showed us that respect isn't demanded, it's earned. That age is just a number, not a definition of who we are or what we can do. Ethan approached, placing a warm hand on my shoulder. Grandma, thank you for not giving up on us, even when we deserved it. I smiled, feeling a peace I hadn't experienced in a very long time. It wasn't the peace of resignation, which we so often mistake for wisdom in old age. It was the peace of someone who had commanded respect, who hadn't allowed herself to be diminished. Family isn't just blood, I said, raising my own glass. It's a daily choice. It's mutual respect. It's seeing the other person for who they truly are, not for who we'd like them to be for our own convenience. I looked at each of them. My son, my grandchildren, my daughter-in-law, my friends, people who finally saw me, truly saw me. And what about the land? Eleanor asked discreetly, when we had a moment alone. It's being put to excellent use by the Conservancy, I replied. They're preserving the springs, planting native trees. Carl would have been proud. And you don't regret it? It was valuable property. I looked at my family, gathered and transformed. At Mike, who was now conversing respectfully with Millie. At Ethan, who was explaining something about his studies to Charlotte. A newfound humility softening his expression. At Jen, who was serving more juice to one of my church friends with genuine interest. Some things are far more valuable than money or land, Eleanor, I replied. This lesson was worth every penny. The gentle night wind rustled the leaves of the blueberry bush, the same one that yielded the fruit for my preserves, the ones everyone now appreciated. I took a deep breath, inhaling the delicate perfume of the garden flowers I'd planted with my own hands. You know, Eleanor, I said, a knowing twinkle in my eye. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But justice is like a good batch of blueberry preserves. It takes time, needs the right touch, and leaves a sweet taste that lingers long after the meal is over. Eleanor laughed softly, squeezing my hand. You were always the wisest of us, Susan. When night fell completely, and the stars shone above us like silent witnesses, I realized I had gained something far more valuable than a piece of land or forced respect. I had gained my place, not as grandma, not as this old lady, not as a disposable appendage of the family, but as Susan, simply Susan, with my own story, my own strength, my own choices. In life, as I learned, karma works in silence, not as punishment, but as a relentless, patient teacher. And sometimes, when we have the courage not to accept less than we deserve, it brings us not only justice, but true redemption. For me, for my family, and for all women who, as they age, refuse to become invisible.